Lieutenant Sarah Chun had learned to ignore the whispers. 3 months into her deployment at Forward Operating Base Meridian, the comments about her tattoo had become as routine as morning reveille. The intricate wings that spread across her shoulder blades, visible whenever she wore her PT gear, drew stares and snickers from soldiers who couldn't understand why anyone would permanently mark their body with something so delicate, so feminine. "Check out the angel wings," Sergeant Martinez would mutter to his squad as Sarah passed the mess tent. "Bet she thinks she's going to fly away from here when things get tough." Sarah kept walking, her combat boots steady against the dusty ground of the Afghan outpost. She'd heard worse during her 4 years in the Army. The wing tattoo was a memorial to her younger sister Emma, who died in a car accident the week before Sarah's 18th birthday. Emma had always said Sarah was her guardian angel, protecting her from bullies at school and nightmares in the dark. The wings weren't about flying away. They were about remembering who she was protecting, even here, thousands of miles from home. The base buzzed with nervous energy that morning. Intelligence reports suggested increased Taliban activity in the surrounding valleys. Command had been monitoring radio chatter for days, and everyone knew something was building. The 400-person outpost sat in a strategic position overlooking 3 major supply routes, making it a valuable target for enemy forces looking to disrupt coalition operations. Captain Williams addressed the assembled troops during the morning briefing. "We've got credible intel suggesting a coordinated attack within the next 48 hours, he announced, his weathered face serious. "All leave is canceled, and we're moving to heightened alert status. Squad leaders, ensure your people are ready." Sarah's role as a communications specialist meant she'd be stationed in the command center during any engagement. Her job was to maintain contact with surrounding bases and coordinate air support if needed. It wasn't the glamorous combat role that some soldiers craved, but Sarah understood its critical importance. Information flow could mean the difference between a successful defense and a catastrophic defeat. As the briefing dispersed, she overheard Private Johnson talking to his buddies near the equipment shed. "Great, we're trusting our lives to angel wings over there," he said, nodding towards Sarah. "Hope she doesn't get too distracted admiring her pretty tattoo when the shooting starts." The comment stung more than usual. Sarah had proven herself repeatedly during her deployment, handling communications during 2 previous attacks with skill and composure. She'd earned commendations from her superiors and respect from most of her unit. But there were always those few soldiers who couldn't see past the feminine artwork on her back. That afternoon, Sarah spent time in the communications center, running diagnostics on the radio equipment and satellite uplinks. The sophisticated array of technology allowed the base to maintain contact with headquarters in Kabul, neighboring outposts, and aircraft operating in the region. She methodically checked each frequency, tested backup systems, and verified encryption protocols. If an attack came, these systems would be their lifeline. Specialist Rodriguez, one of the few soldiers who'd never mocked her tattoo, joined her at the communication station. "You ever regret getting those wings?" he asked, genuinely curious rather than mocking. Sarah paused in her equipment check. "Never," she replied firmly. "They remind me why I'm here. My sister believed I could protect people. That's what I'm trying to do." Rodriguez nodded thoughtfully. "I got a tattoo for my brother, too. He died in Iraq before I enlisted. People don't always understand what these marks mean to us." The conversation was interrupted by Sergeant First Class Thompson entering the communications center. Thompson was old-school Army, a veteran of multiple deployments who'd earned the respect of everyone on base through his competence and steady leadership under pressure. "Chun, I need you to run a full communications check with all our neighboring positions," Thompson instructed. "Something's got command nervous, and we need to make sure we can talk to everyone if things go sideways." Sarah began the lengthy process of contacting each base in their operational area. The routine calls revealed subtle signs of tension throughout the region. Radio operators at other outposts reported increased reconnaissance activity, suspicious vehicle movements, and intercepted communications suggesting coordinated planning by enemy forces. As evening approached, the base settled into an uneasy routine. Sentries took their positions along the perimeter walls. Heavy weapons teams checked their ammunition supplies, and quick reaction forces prepared their gear for rapid deployment. The mess hall conversations were quieter than usual, filled with the subdued tension that preceded combat. Sarah ate dinner alone, as she often did. The isolation that came with being one of the few women on the base, combined with the ridicule about her tattoo, had taught her to find comfort in solitude. She used the time to review communication protocols and study maps of the surrounding terrain. Understanding the geography would help her coordinate support more effectively if an attack materialized. After dinner, she walked the perimeter of the base, checking on the communications equipment positioned at various guard posts. The evening air carried the scent of dust and diesel fuel, mixed with the lingering aroma of dinner from the mess tent. Stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky, brilliant and clear in the desert air far from any light pollution. At Tower 3, she found Private Williams adjusting the radio antenna. "Everything working properly?" she asked. Williams looked surprised to see her. He was one of the younger soldiers, barely 20 years old, and had never directly commented on her tattoo, though she'd seen him listening when others made their jokes. "Yes, ma'am," he replied formally. "Signal strength is good on all frequencies." Sarah nodded and continued her rounds. The base felt different tonight, charged with anticipation and underlying dread. Everyone knew that Taliban forces had been planning something significant. The intelligence reports painted a picture of multiple enemy groups converging on their sector, armed with sophisticated weapons and detailed knowledge of the base's defenses. In the command center, she found Captain Williams studying aerial reconnaissance photos with his senior staff. The images showed suspicious activity at several locations within a 10-mile radius of their position. Heat signatures suggested large groups of people gathering in areas that should have been empty of civilians. "Chun, I want you here early tomorrow morning," the captain told her. "If we're going to get hit, communications will be critical. Make sure everything's working perfectly." Sarah saluted and headed toward her quarters. The small building she shared with 3 other female personnel was quiet, her roommates already asleep or on duty. She lay in her narrow bunk, staring at the ceiling and thinking about home. Her parents had been worried about this deployment, especially after losing Emma. They'd beg her to choose a safer military occupation, something that would keep her away from combat zones. But Sarah knew she belonged here. The Army had given her purpose after Emma's death, a way to channel her grief into something meaningful. Every life she helped protect, every successful mission she supported with her communications work, felt like honoring her sister's memory. The wing tattoo wasn't a sign of fragility. It was armor, a reminder of her strength and purpose. Sleep came fitfully, interrupted by dreams of Emma and the sound of helicopters in the distance. Sarah woke several times, listening to the normal sounds of a military base at night. Generators humming, guards checking in on their radios, the distant rumble of supply trucks arriving from other positions. At 0400, she gave up trying to sleep and headed to the communications center early. The duty officer, Sergeant Martinez, looked tired but alert. "Anything happening?" she asked. "Quiet night," he reported. "But the sensors keep picking up movement on the ridge lines. Could be goats, could be people. Command's got everyone on edge." Sarah began her morning checks, verifying that all communication systems had remained stable overnight. The satellite uplink showed strong signal strength, radio frequencies were clear, and backup power systems tested green across the board. Everything was ready for whatever the day might bring. As dawn broke over the mountains surrounding the base, Sarah watched the sunrise paint the rocky peaks in shades of gold and pink. It was beautiful in a harsh way, this unforgiving landscape that had witnessed so much conflict throughout history. She touched the base of her neck, where the top of her wing tattoo extended just above her uniform collar. Emma would have loved seeing a sunrise like this, would have taken dozens of photos to share with everyone back home. The base began stirring to life around her. Soldiers emerged from their quarters, heading to the mess hall for breakfast before beginning their daily duties. The routine felt normal on the surface, but Sarah could sense the underlying tension. Everyone was waiting for something to happen, watching the horizon for signs of approaching trouble. Captain Williams arrived in the command center earlier than usual, coffee in hand and maps under his arm. "Morning, Chun. Everything ready. All systems green, sir," she reported. "I've tested communications with all neighboring positions. Everyone's reporting normal status, but heightened alertness." The captain nodded grimly. "Intelligence thinks today's the day. Stay sharp." As the morning progressed, reports began filtering in from observation posts around the base perimeter. Multiple groups of armed men were moving through the valleys, using terrain features to mask their approach. Helicopter reconnaissance confirmed what ground observers suspected. A large, well-organized force was positioning itself for a coordinated assault. Sarah monitored radio traffic as unit commanders updated their defensive preparations. Heavy weapons teams moved to predetermined positions. Ammunition was distributed to fighting positions along the perimeter, and medical personnel prepared for casualties. The base transformed from a routine military outpost into a fortress ready for siege. At 1030 hours, the first mortar rounds began falling. The first explosion shook the command center, sending dust cascading from the ceiling and making the radio equipment rattle on its mounting brackets. Sarah's hands flew to her headset as alarms began blaring throughout the base. Outside, she could hear soldiers shouting orders and the heavy footsteps of personnel running to battle stations. "Incoming! Incoming! All personnel to defensive positions." The base-wide announcement crackled through speakers as another mortar round detonated near the vehicle depot, sending a column of black smoke into the morning sky. Captain Williams burst through the command center door, his face grim with concentration. "Chun, I need you to get U.S. air support now. Contact Bagram and request immediate close air support. Also reach out to Firebase Alpha and Bravo. Let them know we're under attack and may need artillery support." Sarah's fingers moved across the radio controls with practiced efficiency, switching to the emergency frequency that would connect her directly to air traffic control at Bagram Air Base. The training that had seemed routine during peacetime now felt vital as explosions continued to rock the base around them. "Bagram Tower, this is FOB Meridian. We are under attack by indirect fire. Request immediate close air support. Grid reference 41, RQR 12345-67890. We have approximately 400 personnel on site." The response came quickly. "FOB Meridian, this is Bagram Tower. We copy your request. We have 2 A-10s inbound. Call Sign Hawkeye Flight, ETA 15 minutes. Can you provide target information?" Before Sarah could respond, a massive explosion near the main gate sent shockwaves through the base. The lights flickered, and several pieces of communications equipment temporarily lost power before backup systems kicked in. Through the reinforced windows of the command center, she could see muzzle flashes from the surrounding ridgelines as enemy fighters opened up with small arms fire. "Hawkeye Flight, this is FOB Meridian," Sarah transmitted, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. "Enemy positions identified on ridge lines to the north and east of our position. Estimate 200-plus enemy fighters with mortars and small arms. Friendly forces are within the perimeter walls." The attack was more intense than anything Sarah had experienced during her deployment. Previous engagements had been brief firefights with small groups of insurgents. This was clearly a major assault, planned and coordinated with military precision. The enemy had positioned themselves to attack from multiple directions simultaneously, making it difficult for the base defenders to concentrate their fire. Sergeant Thompson appeared at her shoulder, his face blackened with smoke from an explosion near his position. "Chun, I need you to contact Firebase Charlie. They've got 155mm artillery, and we need fire support on those ridgelines before they overwhelm our perimeter." Sarah switched frequencies while maintaining her communication with the incoming A-10s. The ability to coordinate multiple radio conversations simultaneously was a skill that had taken months to develop, but now it felt as natural as breathing. Lives depended on her ability to manage the flow of information and coordinate the various assets that could help defend the base. Firebase Charlie, this is FOB Meridian. We are under heavy attack and request immediate artillery support. Target area is ridgelines north and east of our position, grid references to follow. While waiting for Charlie's response, Sarah glanced at the tactical display showing the base layout and surrounding terrain. Red markers indicated known or suspected enemy positions, growing in number as observers reported new muzzle flashes and mortar positions. The attack was coming from a horseshoe-shaped area that partially surrounded the base, with the heaviest concentration on the northern approach where the terrain provided the best cover for attacking forces. Outside the command center, she could hear the distinctive sound of M240 machine guns returning fire from the defensive positions. The soldiers she'd eaten with, worked alongside, and endured ridicule from were now fighting for their lives. Some of those same soldiers who'd mocked her wing tattoo were manning heavy weapons positions, laying down suppressive fire to keep enemy fighters from advancing closer to the perimeter. Meridian, this is Charlie Fire Base, came to response on a radio. We copy your request. We have 255mm howitzers available for immediate fire support. Send target grids when ready. Sarah began transmitting the coordinates that spotters were calling in from various observation posts around the base. The process required absolute precision. Artillery rounds landing even slightly off target could hit friendly positions instead of enemy fighters. She double-checked each grid reference before transmitting, knowing that mistakes in the heat of battle could be catastrophic. The A-10 attack aircraft arrived like twin angels of destruction, their distinctive engine whine audible even over the sound of gunfire and explosions. Sarah watched through the command center windows as the lead aircraft made its first attack run, its 30mm cannon spitting death at enemy positions on the northern ridgeline. Explosions blossomed along the rocky terrain as the aircraft's rounds found their targets. Good hits, came the excited voice of one of the forward observers. Enemy fire from Sector 7 has decreased significantly, but the attack was far from over. Even as the A-10s worked over the northern positions, mortar fire continued to fall throughout the base. The enemy had clearly planned this assault carefully, bringing enough ammunition and personnel to sustain a prolonged engagement. Sarah could hear Captain Williams on another radio, coordinating with higher headquarters and requesting additional support. A particularly close explosion shook the command center again, and Sarah felt debris patter against the reinforced windows. One of the computer screens flickered and went dark, forcing her to switch to backup communications equipment. The redundant systems that had seemed like unnecessary complexity during peacetime training now proved their worth under combat conditions. Meridian, this is Hawkeye 2-1, came a voice in her headset. We're Winchester on 30mm and need to RTB for rearm. Can you hold until we return? Sarah looked at Captain Williams, who was monitoring multiple radio conversations while studying the tactical display. The base had been under attack for nearly 30 minutes, and ammunition expenditure was beginning to concern the defensive commanders. Machine gun positions were going through their basic loads of ammunition at an alarming rate. Hawkeye 2-1, this is Meridian, Sarah responded. Roger your ammunition status. Artillery support is inbound, and we can hold position. Request priority handling for rearm and return. The artillery support arrived with devastating effect. The 155mm rounds from Firebase Charlie began impacting the eastern ridgeline, where enemy mortar crews had been particularly active. The massive explosions sent shock waves across the valley, and several secondary explosions suggested that ammunition supplies had been hit. But even as some enemy positions were neutralized, new threats emerged. Sarah received reports of enemy fighters attempting to breach the perimeter wire on the southern approach, where the terrain was more favorable for a ground assault. Quick reaction forces were moving to counter this threat, but the defenders were being stretched thin across multiple fronts. Chun, I need you to contact headquarters and Request immediate reinforcement, Captain Williams ordered. This is bigger than we anticipated, and we may not be able to hold without additional personnel. Sarah switched to the secure frequency used for communication with higher command levels. The request for reinforcement was not something any commander made lightly, as it indicated that the situation was becoming critical. But the evidence was clear. The base was facing a coordinated assault by a force much larger than intelligence estimates had suggested. Dragon 6, this is Meridian 6, she transmitted, using the proper call signs for command-level communication. We are under heavy attack by estimated 300-plus enemy fighters. Request immediate reinforcement and additional air support. Current ammunition expenditure rate suggests we may be critically low within 2 hours. The response from headquarters was immediate. Meridian 6, this is Dragon 6. We have a quick reaction force from Eagle Base preparing for immediate deployment. ETA, 45 minutes. Also dispatching additional close air support and medical evacuation capability. As Sarah coordinated the incoming support, she became aware of a change in the sounds of battle outside. The volume of defensive fire had decreased noticeably, and she could hear individual voices shouting orders where before there had been a continuous roar of gunfire. Either the attack was weakening or the defenders were running low on ammunition. Sergeant Thompson appeared again, his uniform torn and his left arm wrapped in a bloody bandage. Chun, we've got wounded who need evacuation, but the landing zone is still under fire. Can you coordinate with the incoming birds to suppress that hilltop before they arrive? Sarah immediately contacted the artillery support and requested fire on the positions overlooking the helicopter landing zone. The safety of wounded soldiers depended on clearing those enemy positions before medical helicopters arrived. She provided the grid coordinates and requested immediate fire for effect, knowing that every minute of delay meant additional suffering for the wounded. The 155mm rounds began impacting the designated hillside within minutes. Sarah watched the explosions walk across the terrain, systematically destroying the enemy positions that had been controlling the landing zone with small arms fire. Secondary explosions indicated that ammunition caches were being hit, suggesting the enemy had been well prepared for a sustained engagement. Landing zone clear of enemy fire, reported one of the observation posts. Safe for helicopter approach from the south. Sarah immediately relayed this information to the incoming medical evacuation helicopters, providing them with the safest approach route and current wind conditions. The coordination required her to monitor multiple radio frequencies simultaneously while keeping track of the overall tactical situation and the status of various support assets. The sound of helicopter rotors became audible over the diminishing gunfire as 2 Black Hawk medical evacuation helicopters approached from the south. Sarah coordinated their approach with the base air traffic controller, ensuring they had current information about friendly positions and potential threats during landing. As the helicopters touched down in the designated landing zone, medical personnel ran toward them carrying wounded soldiers on stretchers. Sarah could see that several of the casualties were soldiers from her own unit, people she'd worked alongside for months. The reality of combat was different from training exercises. These were real wounds, real pain, real consequences. The quick reaction force arrived just as the medical helicopters departed with the wounded. 3 Chinook helicopters disgorged 60 additional soldiers who immediately moved to reinforce the most threatened sections of the perimeter. Sarah coordinated their insertion with the base commanders, providing current information about enemy positions and friendly unit locations. With the arrival of reinforcements and continued artillery support, the intensity of enemy fire began to decrease noticeably. The attack had lasted nearly 2 hours, and the sustained combat had taken its toll on both attackers and defenders. Ammunition expenditure by enemy forces must have been enormous, and their casualties from artillery and airstrikes were clearly significant. Captain Williams looked exhausted, but relieved as he assessed the changing tactical situation. Chun, contact Dragon 6 and provide a current status report. I think we're through the worst of it, but I want higher headquarters to understand what we've been facing here. Sarah composed her thoughts before beginning the formal status report that would become part of the official record of the engagement. Her voice remained steady and professional as she described the scope of the attack, the casualties sustained, and the current tactical situation. By 1400 hours, the sustained enemy assault had largely collapsed. Sporadic sniper fire continued from distant positions, but the coordinated attack that had threatened to overrun the base was broken. Sarah remained at her communications station, monitoring radio traffic and coordinating the arrival of additional supplies and personnel to replace those lost during the engagement. The aftermath of combat revealed the true scope of what they had faced. Reconnaissance teams venturing outside the perimeter discovered evidence of a massive enemy force that had been planning this attack for weeks. Abandoned equipment, ammunition caches, and prepared fighting positions indicated that the Taliban had intended to capture or destroy the base entirely. Captain Williams called for an all-hands meeting in the mess hall at 1,600 hours. As personnel gathered, Sarah noticed the exhausted faces of soldiers who had spent hours in combat. Some bore visible wounds, while others showed the psychological strain of sustained battle. The mood was subdued, but relieved they had survived something that could have been catastrophic. "Ladies and gentlemen," Captain Williams began, his voice carrying across the packed tent, "what happened here today was extraordinary. Intelligence estimates now suggest we faced a force of over 400 enemy fighters, supported by mortars, recoilless rifles, and coordinated from multiple positions. This was not a random attack. It was a full-scale assault designed to overrun our position." He paused, looking around at the assembled soldiers. "We held this base because every person here did their job under the most difficult circumstances possible. But I want to highlight something specific that made the difference between success and disaster." Sarah felt uncomfortable as she noticed the captain's gaze settling on her. She had simply done her job, coordinating communications and support assets as she had been trained to do. But the attention made her aware that others were also looking in her direction. Communications during this engagement were flawless, Captain Williams continued. Specialists coordinated air support, artillery fire, medical evacuation, and reinforcement with a level of skill and composure that I've rarely seen in my 20 years of service. Her ability to manage multiple radio nets simultaneously while maintaining perfect accuracy under intense enemy fire directly contributed to our successful defense. The tent was quiet except for the distant sound of helicopters bringing in additional supplies. Sarah felt heat rising in her cheeks as she realized the entire unit was listening to this unexpected praise. It was a stark contrast to the ridicule and dismissive comments she had endured for months about her wing tattoo. Sergeant Martinez, who had been among the most vocal critics of her tattoo, stood up from his position near the back of the tent. "Sir, if I may," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the space. "I owe Specialist Chun an apology, and I think some of the rest of us do too." The statement created a ripple of murmurs through the assembled soldiers. Martinez looked directly at Sarah as he continued. "We've given you a hard time about that tattoo, Chun. Made jokes, questioned whether you belonged here. Today proved how wrong we were. You kept us connected to the outside world when it mattered most. You probably saved lives with your communications work." Private Johnson, another soldier who had frequently mocked her tattoo, nodded in agreement. "I was wrong too, Chun. Sorry about the comments. Today showed what kind of soldier you really are." The unexpected apologies created an emotional moment that Sarah hadn't anticipated. For months, she had endured the snide remarks and questioning looks, knowing that she belonged in the army, but unable to convince some of her fellow soldiers. Now, in the aftermath of real combat, those same soldiers were acknowledging her contributions. But what happened next surprised everyone, including Sarah herself. Specialist Rodriguez, who had always been respectful toward her, stood up and began removing his uniform shirt. Across his chest was a tattoo that had been hidden beneath his clothing, A memorial piece featuring a portrait of a young man in Army uniform with dates marking a brief life. "This is my brother Miguel," Rodriguez said, his voice thick with emotion. "He died in Iraq in 2004 before I enlisted. I got this tattoo to carry him with me everywhere I go. I've kept it hidden because I was afraid people would think it was unprofessional or too emotional for a soldier." Other soldiers began shifting uncomfortably, and Sarah could see that Rodriguez's revelation was having an unexpected effect. Sergeant Thompson, the grizzled veteran who had served multiple deployments, looked around the tent and made a decision that would change the entire dynamic of their unit. "I think it's time we talked honestly about something," Thompson said, standing up. He rolled up his sleeves, revealing tattoos on both forearms that had been carefully concealed beneath his uniform. One was a memorial to soldiers killed in action, listing names and dates. The other was a detailed combat medic symbol surrounded by imagery representing his service in Iraq and Afghanistan. "We all carry things with us," Thompson continued. "Memories, losses, reasons for being here. Some people carry them inside, and some people carry them on their skin. There's nothing wrong with either approach." What followed was unprecedented in Sarah's military experience. One by one, soldiers throughout the tent began revealing tattoos they had kept hidden beneath their uniforms. Memorial pieces for lost family members, military unit symbols, religious imagery, patriotic designs, a tapestry of personal meaning that had been concealed out of fear of judgment or ridicule. Private Williams, the young soldier from Tower 3, showed a tattoo honoring his grandfather who had served in Vietnam. Staff Sergeant Davis revealed an intricate piece commemorating his service dog who had died detecting IEDs in Iraq. Even Captain Williams rolled up his sleeve to show a small tattoo featuring the coordinates of a place in Afghanistan where he had lost several soldiers under his command. The revelation created an atmosphere of unprecedented openness and mutual understanding. These soldiers, who had served together for months, were seeing each other in an entirely new light. The wing tattoo that had made Sarah a target for ridicule was suddenly seen in the context of a shared human experience of loss, memory, and meaning. "Chun, tell us about your wings," Thompson said gently. "If you want to." Sarah felt the weight of dozens of eyes on her, but for the first time since her deployment began, the attention didn't feel hostile or mocking. These soldiers had just revealed deeply personal aspects of themselves, creating a space for honest sharing that hadn't existed before. "My sister Emma," Sarah said quietly, her voice growing stronger as she continued. "She died in a car accident when she was 16. She used to tell people I was her guardian angel, always protecting her from bullies and bad dreams. When she died, I felt like I'd failed at the most important job I'd ever had." The tent was completely silent as Sarah spoke, with soldiers listening intently to words that explained the meaning behind the artwork they had ridiculed for months. "I got the wings because Emma believed I could protect people," Sarah continued. "She believed I was strong enough to watch over others and keep them safe. When she died, I thought maybe she was wrong about me. But the Army gave me a chance to find out if she was right. Every successful mission, every life we protect, every time I help coordinate support that saves people, it feels like honoring what she believed about me." The explanation transformed everything. The delicate, feminine artwork that had seemed inappropriate for a combat zone was suddenly understood as armor, a permanent reminder of purpose and responsibility that gave Sarah strength in difficult moments. Sergeant Martinez stood up again, and when he spoke, his voice carried a tone of respect that Sarah had never heard from him before. "Chun, I want to apologize again, but more specifically this time. We saw your tattoo and made assumptions about who you were and what you were capable of. We thought it meant you were soft or that you didn't take being a soldier seriously. We couldn't have been more wrong." Private Johnson nodded emphatically. "We saw something beautiful and thought it meant you were weak. Today proved that beautiful things can be the strongest things of all. Your sister will be proud of what you did here." The moment was interrupted by the arrival of a helicopter carrying Colonel Patterson, the brigade commander who had come to personally assess the situation at the base. As senior personnel prepared for his briefing, the informal gathering in the mess tent began to disperse, but the atmosphere had fundamentally changed. Over the next several days, as the base returned to normal operations and recovered from the attack, Sarah noticed a dramatic shift in how she was treated by her fellow soldiers. The mocking comments and dismissive attitudes disappeared entirely, replaced by genuine respect and inclusion. Soldiers who had previously avoided her began seeking her out for conversation and advice. More significantly, other personnel began openly displaying tattoos that they had previously kept hidden. The culture of the unit shifted toward acceptance and understanding of the personal meaning behind body art. The regulation haircuts and identical uniforms of military life had always emphasized uniformity, but the revelation about tattoos allowed for individual expression within that framework. Specialist Rodriguez approached Sarah a few days after the attack, while she was performing routine maintenance on the communications equipment. "I wanted to thank you," he said quietly, "not just for what you did during the attack, but for being brave enough to show your tattoo despite the comments. It made it easier for the rest of us to be honest about our own." Sarah looked up from her work, surprised by the comment. "I never thought about it that way. I just couldn't hide something that meant so much to me." "That's exactly why it mattered," Rodriguez replied. "You showed us that being a good soldier doesn't mean hiding who you are. It means bringing your whole self to the job and finding strength in the things that matter to you." The conversation was overheard by several other soldiers, and Sarah realized that her experience had become something larger than her individual story. She had become a symbol of authenticity and courage, not just in combat, but in the everyday challenge of being true to oneself while serving in the military. Captain Williams called her into his office that afternoon for a formal debriefing about her role during the attack. As they discussed the technical aspects of the communications coordination, he also addressed the broader impact of recent events on unit cohesion. "Chun, what happened in that mess tent was remarkable," he said. "I've never seen a unit come together like that, and I think it started with your willingness to be yourself despite criticism. That takes a special kind of courage." Sarah felt uncomfortable with the praise, but she understood that her experience had touched something important about military service and personal identity. "Sir, I just try to do my job and honor my sister's memory. I never expected it to become about more than that." "The best leaders rarely do," Captain Williams replied. "But that's exactly what made it powerful. You weren't trying to make a statement or prove a point. You were just being authentic, and that gave others permission to be authentic too." As her deployment continued, Sarah found herself in an unexpected position of informal leadership within the unit. Soldiers sought her advice not just about technical matters, but about personal challenges and career decisions. The wing tattoo that had once marked her as different now symbolized the strength that came from embracing one's true identity while serving something larger than oneself. 3 weeks after the attack, Sarah received word that her communications work during the engagement had earned her a commendation from brigade headquarters. The Bronze Star Medal recommendation cited her exceptional performance under enemy fire and critical coordination of defensive assets that directly contributed to the successful defense of forward operating base Meridian. The news spread quickly throughout the base, creating a buzz of excitement and pride among the soldiers who had witnessed her performance firsthand. But for Sarah, the formal recognition felt less significant than the personal transformation that had occurred within her unit. The relationships built in the aftermath of combat meant more than any medal ever could. Sergeant Thompson found her in the communications center the morning after the announcement, carrying a manila folder and wearing an expression of unusual solemnity. "Chun, I've got something for you," he said, settling into a chair beside her workstation. Inside the folder were dozens of photographs taken by soldiers throughout the base during the past several weeks. Sarah was surprised to see herself featured in many of them, working at radio equipment, coordinating with other personnel, and participating in the daily life of the military unit. But what struck her most was how different she looked in these recent photos compared to images from earlier in her deployment. "You see it, don't you?" Thompson asked, watching her examine the photographs. The change in how you carry yourself. You're not hiding anymore. Sarah studied the images, recognizing the truth in his observation. In early photos, she appeared guarded and isolated, clearly aware of being an outsider. The recent pictures showed someone confident and integrated, surrounded by soldiers who clearly respected and valued her presence. When I first got here, I felt like I had to prove myself every single day, Sarah reflected. Like I was always on trial for being different. The tattoo just gave people a visible reason to question whether I belonged. Thompson nodded thoughtfully. That attack changed more than just how people see your tattoo. It changed how they understand what strength looks like. Some of the strongest people I've served with carry their motivations on their skin, in their hearts, or in their actions. The location doesn't matter. The meaning does. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Private Johnson, who had requested to speak with Sarah about a personal matter. Since the unit's transformation following the attack, several soldiers had sought her counsel on issues ranging from career decisions to family problems back home. Chun, I wanted to ask your advice about something. Johnson began hesitantly. My girlfriend back home has been pushing me to get a tattoo for my brother who died in a motorcycle accident before I deployed. I've been afraid it would hurt my career, but after everything that happened here. Sarah listened as Johnson described his internal struggle between honoring his brother's memory and conforming to what he perceived as military expectations. It was a conversation she'd had with several other soldiers, each grappling with the balance between personal expression and professional image. What would the tattoo mean to you? Sarah asked. Not to anyone else, not to your career, but to you personally. Johnson's face lit up as he described his vision for a memorial piece that would honor his brother's love of motorcycles while incorporating military imagery representing Johnson's own service. The passion in his voice made it clear that this wasn't about fashion or rebellion. It was about carrying a piece of home and family into the challenging environment of military deployment. Then, you have your answer, Sarah told him. The meaning you just described is worth any temporary discomfort from people who don't understand. And based on what's happened in our unit, I think you might be surprised by how understanding people can be when they know the real story. Over the following days, Sarah noticed Johnson speaking with other soldiers about his brother and his plans for the memorial tattoo. The conversations created ripple effects throughout the unit, with personnel sharing their own stories of loss, family connections, and personal motivations for military service. The culture that had emerged from their shared combat experience continued to evolve in positive directions. Captain Williams approached her during evening chow with news that would significantly impact her military career. Chun, I've recommended you for promotion to sergeant, he announced. The paperwork is already moving through channels, and based on your performance here, I don't anticipate any problems with approval. The promotion was unexpected and gratifying, but Sarah felt most proud of the reasoning Captain Williams provided. Your technical skills are outstanding, but what really sets you apart is your leadership ability. The way you've helped this unit come together and support each other. That's the kind of leadership the Army needs more of. As word of her promotion spread, Sarah found herself thinking about the long journey from the isolation and ridicule of her early deployment to the respect and responsibility she now enjoyed. The wing tattoo hadn't changed, but everything else had transformed completely. Specialist Rodriguez congratulated her during their evening communications check, but he also raised an important point that had been on Sarah's mind. You know this story is going to follow you for the rest of your career, right? People are going to hear about the woman with the wing tattoo who proved herself under fire. Sarah had considered this possibility. The Bronze Star recommendation and promotion would become part of her permanent military record, along with detailed accounts of her role during the attack. Future assignments and opportunities would likely be influenced by the reputation she was building at Forward Operating Base Meridian. I hope it helps other people feel comfortable being themselves, Sarah replied. If my experience makes it easier for the next soldier with a meaningful tattoo or the next person who feels like an outsider, then I'm glad to have that reputation. The conversation touched on something both soldiers had observed during their deployment, the way military culture could sometimes discourage individuality and personal expression, even when that expression was meaningful and appropriate. The transformation of their units suggested that acceptance and authenticity could coexist with military discipline and effectiveness. 2 days before Sarah's promotion ceremony, she received a letter from home that would prove to be one of the most important communications of her deployment. Her parents had written to express their pride in her service and their understanding of why the wing tattoo had been so important to her. "We never fully understood why you felt you needed to get that tattoo," her mother had written. "But after hearing about everything you've accomplished and how you've honored Emma's memory through your service, we finally see what she saw in you. You really are our guardian angel, protecting people far from home." The letter brought tears to Sarah's eyes as she sat alone in her quarters that evening. The long journey from grief and loss to purpose and belonging had led her to this moment of recognition and acceptance, not just from her military unit, but from her family back home. Sarah's promotion ceremony took place in the same mess hall where the unit had shared their stories about tattoos and personal meaning. Captain Williams conducted the brief, formal procedure, pinning sergeant stripes on her uniform while the assembled soldiers witnessed her advancement to non-commissioned officer rank. "Sergeant Chun," Captain Williams announced formally, "has demonstrated exceptional leadership, technical competence, and personal courage during her service at Forward Operating Base Meridian. Her promotion reflects the Army's recognition of her potential for continued leadership and service." The applause from her fellow soldiers felt genuine and enthusiastic, a stark contrast to the indifferent or hostile reception she had experienced during her early months at the base. As she looked out at the assembled faces, Sarah could see respect, admiration, and genuine friendship in their expressions. Following the ceremony, soldiers approached to offer personal congratulations and share their own reflections on how the unit had changed. Private Williams, the young soldier from Tower 3, spoke for many when he said, "Sergeant Chun, you showed us that being different can make you stronger, not weaker. That's something I'll remember for the rest of my career." Sergeant Martinez, who had been among her harshest critics, offered perhaps the most meaningful comment. Sergeant Chun, I learned more about leadership from watching you handle that criticism and prove yourself through actions than I learned from years of leadership courses. You never fought back against the comments. You just kept doing your job until the job spoke for itself." The recognition felt gratifying, but Sarah understood that her experience represented something larger than individual achievement. She had become a symbol of the possibility for authentic self-expression within military service, demonstrating that personal meaning and military effectiveness could complement rather than conflict with each other. As the ceremony concluded and soldiers dispersed to their evening duties, Sarah remained in the mess hall for a few minutes, reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The wing tattoo on her back felt different now, not like a mark of differentness that set her apart, but like a symbol of strength that connected her to something larger than herself. Sergeant Thompson approached as she prepared to leave. "You know what I think the most important part of this whole story is?" he asked. Sarah looked at him curiously, waiting for his insight. "You never changed who you were," Thompson said simply. "You changed how other people saw who you were. That's the difference between compromise and growth." The observation resonated deeply with Sarah as she considered her path forward. The promotion to sergeant would bring new responsibilities and challenges, but it would also provide opportunities to influence military culture in positive ways. Her experience had shown that authenticity and acceptance were not just compatible with military service. They could enhance it. That night, as Sarah updated her family on the promotion and ceremony, she found herself thinking about Emma and the belief that had started this entire journey. Her sister's faith that Sarah could protect people had led her to military service, sustained her through difficult training, and given her strength during combat. Now, as a newly promoted sergeant with a Bronze Star recommendation and a reputation for leadership under pressure, Sarah realized that Emma's belief had proven prophetic in ways neither sister could have anticipated. The wing tattoo would always remind her of that original faith, but it now also represented the growth, courage, and authenticity that had defined her military journey. Her deployment at Forward Operating Base Meridian was scheduled to end in 6 weeks, but the impact of her experience would extend far beyond her time in Afghanistan. The relationships built, lessons learned, and cultural changes initiated would influence her career and the careers of every soldier who had witnessed her transformation from outsider to leader. 6 months after returning from Afghanistan, Sergeant Sarah Chun stood before a classroom of new Army communications specialists at Fort Gordon, Georgia. The training facility buzzed with nervous energy as young soldiers prepared for their first deployments. Sarah's role as an instructor had come as a direct result of her performance at Forward Operating Base Meridian and the leadership qualities she had demonstrated under fire. On the whiteboard behind her were technical diagrams showing radio frequencies and communication protocols, but Sarah knew that the most important lessons she would teach these soldiers had nothing to do with equipment manuals. The wing tattoo on her back, now visible in her Army-issued physical training uniform, had become a teaching tool as much as a personal memorial. "How many of you have tattoos?" she asked the assembled class of 30 soldiers. About half raised their hands hesitantly, clearly uncertain whether this was a trick question that might get them in trouble. "Keep your hands up," Sarah continued, turning to face the group. "Now, how many of you have been worried about whether your tattoo might affect how people see you as a soldier?" Nearly all the raised hands remained elevated, accompanied by nervous glances between students. Sarah recognized the uncertainty in their faces, the same concern she had carried into her own deployment years earlier. "I want to tell you about something that happened to me in Afghanistan," Sarah began, settling into her teaching persona. "It's about perception, reality, and the difference between hiding who you are and being professional." Over the next hour, she shared her story with the new soldiers. Not just the technical details of the communications work she had performed, but the personal journey of dealing with criticism, proving herself through action, and ultimately helping to transform an entire unit's culture around acceptance and authenticity. Private First Class Martinez, coincidentally sharing a surname with one of her former critics, raised her hand during the discussion period. "Sergeant Chun, how did you keep doing your job when people were making fun of your tattoo? I have a memorial piece for my grandmother, and I'm scared people will think I'm not serious about being a soldier." Sarah recognized the fear in the young woman's voice. "Private Martinez, I learned that you can't control what people think, but you can control what they observe. Your job performance, your attitude, your reliability. Those things speak louder than any decoration on your skin. But more importantly, the right people will eventually understand that meaningful tattoos often belong to the most dedicated soldiers." The lesson continued with practical advice about military bearing, professional communication, and technical skills. But woven throughout was a theme of authentic leadership, the idea that true strength came from bringing your whole self to service while maintaining the discipline and standards that military effectiveness required. After class, several students approached Sarah individually to share their own concerns and stories. Private Johnson showed her a tattoo honoring his father's police service. Specialist Davis revealed artwork commemorating his service dog from his previous deployment. Each conversation reinforced Sarah's understanding that her Afghanistan experience had given her unique insight into common military challenges. That evening, Sarah received a phone call from Captain Williams, now Major Williams, who had been promoted and transferred to a staff position at the Pentagon. "Chun, I've been hearing interesting things about your work at Fort Gordon," he said. "Apparently, you're making quite an impact on the new communications specialists." Sarah was surprised by the call, but pleased to hear from her former commander. "Sir, I'm just trying to share some of the lessons we learned together in Afghanistan. These young soldiers face a lot of the same challenges we dealt with." "That's exactly why I'm calling," Major Williams replied. "I've been asked to recommend instructors for a new leadership development program focused on unit cohesion and authentic leadership. Your name was the first one I thought of." The opportunity Major Williams described would involve developing curriculum and training materials for a program designed to address exactly the kinds of cultural issues Sarah's unit had worked through during their deployment. The Army was recognizing that traditional approaches to uniformity and discipline needed to be balanced with acceptance of individual motivations and meaningful personal expression. The program is still being developed, Major Williams explained, but the concept is to help leaders understand how to build unit cohesion while respecting individual authenticity. Your experience in Afghanistan provided a perfect case study of how that balance can work in practice. Sarah felt honored by the recommendation, but also somewhat overwhelmed by the scope of what was being proposed. The idea of influencing Army-wide policy and training based on her personal experience seemed both exciting and daunting. 2 weeks later, she found herself at the Army Leadership Institute, presenting her Afghanistan story to a group of senior officers and civilian researchers working on the new program. The presentation went beyond her individual experience to address broader questions about military culture, leadership styles, and the relationship between personal meaning and professional effectiveness. Colonel Patterson, the same brigade commander who had visited her base after the attack, was part of the audience. During the question and answer period, he offered observations that validated Sarah's approach to leadership and authenticity. What Sergeant Chin demonstrated in Afghanistan, Colonel Patterson said, was that authentic leadership often emerges from exactly the kinds of challenges that conventional thinking suggests should be avoided. Her willingness to maintain her personal identity while excelling at her military duties created space for her entire unit to operate more authentically and effectively. The research team was particularly interested in the transformation that had occurred within Sarah's unit following the attack. The shift from ridicule and exclusion to acceptance and mutual support represented exactly the kind of cultural change the Army wanted to replicate across a broader range of units and situations. Dr. Jennifer Martinez, a military psychologist working on the project, approached Sarah after the presentation. Sergeant Chun, your story illustrates something we've been trying to quantify through research: the relationship between personal authenticity and team performance. Would you be interested in collaborating on some formal studies of these dynamics? The conversation led to Sarah's involvement in a groundbreaking research project examining how military units could maintain discipline and effectiveness while accommodating individual expression and personal meaning. Her Afghanistan experience became a central case study in publications that would influence military leadership doctrine for years to come. 6 months into her work with the Leadership Development Program, Sarah received word that the Bronze Star Medal recommendation from her Afghanistan deployment had been approved. The formal presentation ceremony would take place at Fort Gordon, with several members of her original unit traveling to attend the event. On the day of the ceremony, Sarah stood before an assembly that included not just her current students and colleagues, but also Sergeant Thompson, Staff Sergeant Martinez, and several other soldiers from Forward Operating Base Meridian. The presence of her former unit members made the recognition feel complete in a way that formal awards could not achieve alone. General Roberts, the commanding general of the Signal Corps, presented the medal while reading the citation that detailed Sarah's communications work during the attack. But in his remarks following the formal presentation, he addressed the broader significance of her story. Sergeant Chin's courage under fire was exceptional, General Roberts said, but her long-term impact on military leadership and unit cohesion may be even more significant. She has shown us that authentic leadership and military effectiveness are not just compatible. They can be mutually reinforcing. Following the ceremony, Sarah's former unit members shared updates on their own careers and the lasting impact of their shared experience in Afghanistan. Sergeant Martinez had been promoted to Staff Sergeant and was now training new communications specialists at another base, incorporating lessons about acceptance and authenticity that had emerged from their deployment. Chun, I tell that story about your tattoo in every leadership class I teach, Martinez said during the reception following the ceremony. Not just as an example of good communications work, but as an example of how wrong we can be when we make assumptions about people based on appearance. Private Johnson, now a specialist, had indeed gotten the memorial tattoo for his brother and had experienced none of the criticism he had feared. "The culture has changed," he told Sarah. "People are more open to understanding the meaning behind personal choices. What happened in our unit wasn't just a one-time thing. It spread." The observation proved prophetic as Sarah continued her work with the Leadership Development Program. Reports from across the Army indicated that units were becoming more accepting of individual expression while maintaining high standards of performance and discipline. The transformation her unit had experienced was being replicated throughout the service. 2 years after her return from Afghanistan, Sarah received orders for her next assignment: promotion to staff sergeant and placement as the senior instructor for the new Authentic Leadership Program that had grown out of her research and teaching work. The position would allow her to influence military leadership development on a service-wide level. On her last day at Fort Gordon, Sarah stood again before a classroom of new communication specialists. These soldiers represented a different generation of military personnel, more diverse, more accepting of individual differences, and more sophisticated in their understanding of the relationship between personal authenticity and professional excellence. "The most important piece of equipment you'll carry with you isn't in any manual," she told the class during her final lesson. "It's your understanding of why you serve, what gives your service meaning, and how that meaning can strengthen both you and the people you serve alongside." She turned to face the whiteboard, where she had drawn a simple outline of wings. These represent protection, purpose, and the strength that comes from honoring what matters most to you. Whether you carry that meaning on your skin, in your heart, or in your actions doesn't matter. What matters is that you carry it forward. As the students filed out of the classroom, many stopped to thank her personally for the lessons that had extended far beyond technical training. Sarah recognized in their faces the same uncertainty and determination she had felt as a young soldier, but also a confidence that came from understanding that authenticity and military service could enhance rather than conflict with each other. That evening, as Sarah packed her belongings for transfer to her new assignment, she found herself thinking about Emma and the original inspiration for her military service. The wing tattoo that had once made her a target for ridicule had become a symbol recognized throughout the Army as representing authentic leadership and the strength that comes from serving for meaningful reasons. Her phone rang with a call from her parents, who had followed her military career with pride and amazement as their daughter had grown from a grieving teenager into a respected military leader and educator. "Sarah, we saw the article about your new assignment in the Army Times," her mother said, her voice filled with emotion. "Emma would be so proud of everything you've accomplished and all the people you've helped." As Sarah prepared for sleep in her quarters for the final time, she touched the base of her neck where the wing tattoo began. The memorial to Emma had guided her through the darkest moments of her deployment, sustained her through criticism and doubt, and ultimately become a symbol of transformation that had influenced an entire military culture. Her new assignment would bring fresh challenges and opportunities, but Sarah felt confident that the lessons learned at Forward Operating Base Meridian about courage, authenticity, and the power of leading by example would continue to guide her service and impact the soldiers she would train and mentor in the years ahead. The wing tattoo would always remind her of Emma's original faith and her protective instincts, but it now also represented something larger, proof that individual meaning and collective purpose could create strength beyond what either could achieve alone. In honoring her sister's memory, Sarah had discovered her own capacity for leadership and her ability to help others find the courage to serve authentically. The journey from ridicule to respect, from isolation to influence, had shown her that the most powerful leaders were often those who remained true to themselves while adapting to serve something greater than themselves. It was a lesson she would carry forward into whatever challenges and opportunities lay ahead in her continuing military career.